Hey everybody, welcome back to Jägerhorn. I know it's been a very long time since the last episode I've made on this, and hell, it's even been a very long time since I've had any kind of decent upload rates. And for those of you who haven't seen my Frontier Expo vlog, I just want to clarify, I've been living in Japan for the past 3 months as a part of an exchange program, which is really cool, and it's a really cool thing from my university, and I've been doing all kinds of awesome things, but I've basically done barely any Planet Coaster in the last 3 months, and I haven't been able to even finish a single video. In fact, that's sort of what I'm trying to achieve here. So that's my poor explanation for why my upload rate has been so terrible recently, and why I actually haven't worked, or why I actually haven't made a video on Jägerhorn in about 3 months. That said, there are some funny repercussions for this video in particular, because I started making this video in early September when I had like a few hours to play around with it, and I just finished it very recently, so this has been recorded over like 3 months, and when I started this, the Halloween update wasn't even out yet, and when I ended this, it was just before the 1.4 update even came out, so this is some old stuff. And also, I haven't done a proper commentary in about 3 months either, so maybe I'm a little bit out of it. We'll see how I'll handle this stuff, but yeah, just so you know, that's basically what's going on right now. I'm sorry about me not posting as much as I used to be, and really being out of the Planet Coaster game practically, because any of the videos that I have been posting recently, I just sort of binged, or I just sort of saved up over the summer vacation when I was in Holland. So yeah, I've basically done fuck all recently. But hopefully, and this is my very hopeful sort of statement at the end of this, but it's not entirely a promise, because I don't dare to make it a promise, but hopefully I will pick it up a little bit more. I definitely don't have as much time as I used to have in Holland, but it should be a little bit better than what it used to be. I definitely want to get back into the game, and just playing it a few times and sort of getting back into the swing of things definitely made me want to play it quite a bit more, and of course the 1.4 update also had a bit of a role to play in that recently as well. In any case, let's actually talk about this episode, because I'm already massively behind. So I called this episode the Alpine Bridges, because in this episode I'll mostly be working on 4 bridges, and I know that sounds like a really lame idea for a theme of a video, but I actually thought it was a pretty handy sort of little box to put this episode in and give it a sort of neat little theme. Since these bridges, I think, do actually play quite a role in this whole area, and they all play a slightly different kind of role. I know that sounds very pretentious, but they're very sort of different bridges in how they work with the rest of the area. So this first bridge, obviously, is a very traditional stone bridge. It's kind of like those classical alpine bridges, or the Roman aqueducts, if you will, and it's sort of this mountain bridge that you very often see between canyons, and I kind of wanted to do this because it made the whole scene for me with the station a little bit stronger. I know I'm running behind here, but I just wanted to keep talking about this bridge while I'm working on the second one, which isn't really as interesting, I think. But yeah, that stone bridge for me was pretty important, since it sort of creates a forced perspective in the sense that it's a lot smaller than those bridges would be in real life, so it sort of makes the whole scene a bit of a miniature and makes it a little bit more interesting than if it were just a simple to scale wooden bridge, which would make the station look quite small. And also it has a very slight downward slope, because of course the coaster track itself has a downward slope, but it has a downward slope that goes away from the path, and it wasn't actually something that I intended from the beginning, but as I built the bridge, it actually worked out amazingly, because it's a kind of forced perspective. It makes it seem as if the bridge is larger than it really is, because, you know, if you're looking at something which is higher than your vantage point and it sort of disappears into the distance, it goes down in your view, and this bridge sort of has that same effect going on, but it's like made more extreme by the fact that the bridge actually does go down, even though it doesn't look that way from the path. So it sort of makes it look as if the bridge is going further away than it actually is, which in turn makes the station look like it's further away than it actually is, and it sort of makes the whole scene a little bit larger, which is sort of helped by the fact that right next to the path where you'll be looking at the bridge, the grass also goes down, so it really makes this whole tiny little trench that the coaster goes through sort of look like an actual proper mountain pass. which I guess sort of harks back to the whole idea of this ride, in that it's kind of like a miniature railroad, and I'm sort of using the same ideas here, but it's on a slightly larger scale. It's not quite on the same scale as, you know, a real-life alpine landscape, but everything is sort of a miniature version of their real selves. That doesn't so much count for the second bridge here, which is just very simple. It's just a way to sort of incorporate this path into the hill, which is on the side of it. And it also kind of helps to make the train sort of seemingly come out of this cave. It creates this very dark hole underneath the path, which I think is some very interesting interaction. And I think should look pretty interesting when you're walking over the paths that go next to this bridge, or when you're walking over the bridge and you can see the train sort of come out from this little tunnel that you have under the path. I think that's just a sort of interesting play that I wanted to have with the train and the path here, but you know, that makes everything sound a lot better than it actually is. It's in reality just a very simple bridge that's not really as good as the other ones in this episode, but for me it's still very important because it works pretty well in the whole scene that I'm trying to set up here. So here I took a little bit of a break and did something that's a little bit of a mandatory chore at this point, and made the catwalks alongside the coaster track here. I wasn't entirely sure if I should have them over here, since this is like a turn that goes up, and you'd sort of reckon you don't really need a catwalk that bad over here. But in the end I did go for it, because for one it looks good, but also this turn is a little bit of a problem. It actually enters the final brakes with a very slow speed, to the point where I actually put drive tires right at the beginning of the brake run by making them block brakes instead of regular brakes. And in that sense, I guess it sort of makes sense to have catwalks along this entire thing, because it's actually possible for the train to get stalled at the top, and you know, whenever a wheel wouldn't entirely work or something, when one of the tires doesn't work, then I guess this sort of catwalk would actually come in quite handy. But yeah, that's definitely one of the more boring aspects of this coaster, just something that I need to get in here. Right here is actually one of my favorite parts of this episode, and it's the roofed bridge. So yeah, you can see that every single bridge I'm building in this video is a slightly different one, and I really just wanted to also have some fun and try out different designs. So this one is inspired by some of the alpine bridges that I've personally seen in the Alps in Europe, which are these bridges that they sometimes build over rivers in the mountains, which are often slightly curved, even though this one is straight, because obviously it's a cube path and it would be really hard to make this actually curved. But they have these simple roofs over them. It's just a simple, you know, timber structure, but it's something that I quite liked, and in this sense I wanted to try it out as well. It also helps that it's another excuse for me to put a spire on top of something, so yeah, I'll be putting a spire on top of this bridge as well. So we're just gonna have a whole load of spires in this area. Maybe a little bit overdone, but in the end I actually really like the look that it has, and it goes very well with the station as well. And what it also sort of helps doing is it sort of splits up the two sight lines that we have on the left side of the station and on the right side of the station. Because this sight line in the middle wasn't really as interesting to me, and there's a lot of stuff in the way, so this roof just sort of makes sure that you don't really have much of a sight line over here anyway. It's more this sort of bridge that's drawing all the attention, and not like a sight line to the station. But on the left of this bridge, I think there's a pretty good one from the main path where you look onto the stone bridge, and on the right side of this there's a pretty good sight line from the other bridge, which is the last one that I'll work on in this episode, which is a little bit, you know, earlier into the queue when you can see the station. And I think that one works out very well as well. But like from straight ahead on this path, it doesn't really work that well for me. So I just figured I'd have enough space to just fill this in with a roof. And in any case, I don't think it really, you know, it really sticks out too much, because it is right next to the bridge of the coaster anyway, which was another tricky thing. I sort of tried making it in such a way that from one side you see this bridge, and like this is the focus. You see that path with the roof over it and the construction underneath it. But from the other side, you barely see any of this. You mostly just see the stone bridge, because this bridge is so much lower than the bridge that the coaster runs over. So it actually gives a very different look from both sides as well, which I thought was kind of interesting. And, oh yeah, the last reason that's gonna, not be as interesting as the other ones, but the last reason was basically just that I wanted to try out one of these kinds of bridges. I've never really done them like exactly as detailed as this, and doing every single part of the timber structure in tiny wooden posts, and it's just a lot of fun to do it. The same goes for the roof. It's a very simple kind of roof, but it's made up of many different pieces, and the trick is really just to make sure that you jut out all the pieces enough so you don't get any Z-fighting. Because if you were to really make these all in exactly the same spots, there would always be a tiny bit of overlap in textures, and you'd get some weird Z-fighting from that. And also it just makes them, of course, look a lot more realistic if you actually have some tiny shadows and a tiny feeling of depth between these roof tiles. And finally, I also just wanted to change the colors a little bit on them, of course, since that makes it sort of look like every shingle, because they're actually shingle, is slightly different. I didn't actually mention the final reason why this roof is pretty handy. It's not entirely why I got the thing, but it's just very handy to have a queue with something going over it in cases that it's a hot day and you want to have some shade from the sun, or when it's a rainy day and you want to have some shade from the rain. It's very common for theme parks to put some kind of cover onto a queue. So if you can actually theme that cover and make it a part of the environment instead of just putting up some very cheap metal roofs or tents like Six Flags would do, then I think you've got something quite good going that can, work both functionally in a practical sense and be something that's nice to look at. And that's always good. Something that I haven't mentioned so far yet though, and that I think I should talk about in this series, is that you should probably not do this if you're planning to make any large park at all. This is one of the reasons why Jägerhorn is just gonna be this one coaster, this tiny little area, and why I'm not gonna expand it, even though it does seem like it should be part of a real park, and I'm trying to make that way. It's just because roofs like these and doing detailing like this is, using so many more pieces than you theoretically even should in Planet Coasters, so it's already lagging up my game quite a lot, even though I don't have that much scenery here. And, the more you add these sort of roofs with all kinds of separate pieces where the game has to render a bunch of stuff that you really don't see, the more you start, ruining your gameplay for not really important reasons, just a tiny little aesthetic difference between making a roof yourself and just using one of the roofs from the game. Which are fine either way, but I just want to have some slightly different looks and that slightly, more different effects, because one of the things that I like about this is that you can actually make every single shingle look unique and not just like a repeating texture. And the same goes for the sort of shadows and overall dynamic lighting that you've got going here. So now it comes to the rock work and terraforming underneath the ride. I'm not entirely sure anymore at what point I was recording this, but I think this was still part of the earlier recordings. It's really just the later parts of recording this that I only recorded more recently. But it was still kind of interesting because by now Jägerhorn has been taking so much time that every single time I open up my game I have to sort of look back on what I was making myself and try to learn from myself on what I was doing and copy, the things that I was doing myself. Which is, just one of those things to keep in mind with all of my videos, is that you only see the things that I'm doing that actually turn out to be something good, and that didn't turn out to be a huge mess. And like probably half my time in Jägerhorn is just spent, fiddling with ideas, or trying out something and getting a look that isn't entirely right. And another part is just looking at my own stuff and trying to see how the hell I did previous things after I've booted up my game for like the first time in a month. So it's a really sort of weird, slow process in that sense. And I'm just trying with the foliage and the catwalks and like the terraforming everywhere to get the same sort of look throughout the ride as well. And of course, at some points the catwalks, I'm trying to do this sort of thing where you see it with roller coasters, with like wooden roller coasters as well, where there are like little crossing spots where you're supposed to cross the coaster tracks. and you've got like these beams laid out over the coaster. So that's also what I've been doing over here, and whenever it sort of goes from catwalks on one side of the coaster to catwalks on the other side. I actually have no idea what I'm gonna do with this weird part of the track where it sort of goes over the other part of the track, where it's like one big curved and banked hill, because it's a horrible sort of structure and a horrible shape to even turn into a bridge. So I have no idea what I'm gonna do with that yet, or how I'm even gonna put any catwalks on that. But for now I'm just sort of procrastinating on it and just working on the rest of the area instead. As for this area, I actually wanted to finish this all off with these tiny bushes and rocks, just to make sure that I could take pictures and videos of these bridges that I'm making in a sort of, you know, finished environment. Usually for me, if I'm making something, it really helps to just make the general area around that look more or less finished as well. Because it just makes a huge difference. I know I always talk about like foliage making a huge difference on how certain things look, and whenever I make a building I like to just get a basic amount of foliage around it, just so that it looks a little bit more finished. It always leaves me with a slightly more satisfied feeling at the end, and it's just a better idea that you can get of how your building is gonna look in the end with the context of the rest of the park around it as well. So moving over to one of the other little things that I did in between in this episode as well, I decided to make a flower bed. And for some reason, instead of just going with a regular edge or curb, by the way, the curbs from 1.4 are absolutely amazing. I know I don't really have like an update video, so I don't really have a dedicated time and space to talk about these things, but damn, the curbs in the new update are really handy and good. In any case, I'm just making my own custom curbs here, and there's no need for those since the guests can't walk through them. But I wanted to get this like little rock blocks look to it, and the only way I could do so was to actually make it out of separate little items every single time. So yeah, it's just one of those cases where just to get a tiny bit more detail, I decide to get hundreds of more objects than I actually need into the game. I do like the look of it though. In any case, over here, I'm trying to keep this fence quite low. It's probably too low for American safety standards, but I think it should be fine in general, considering my park might be probably somewhere in Europe or something. So yeah, I wanted to keep this fence low because obviously I want to have that really cool small vista of the bridge with the station in the back there. And the same goes for the flowers in the little planter that I've got going here. I'm gonna put some like flowers and small shrubbery in there, but everything is just gonna stay quite low just to keep that sort of sight line onto the station intact. So yeah, as for the flowers themselves, that's some kind of boring stuff. That's not really any specific pattern or anything. I'm just putting a bunch of different flowers in different areas. But what's become one of my favorite things to do is just to take some of the really small flowers, some of the ones that we've only been able to recolor since recently, and use those to create large flower beds, since it just gives you, much more control over what the flower beds actually look like, instead of taking like those very large rose bushes from the game, which also look quite good, but they don't really allow you to make that typical flat flower bed that's like a large flower bed made out of lots of very small flowers, basically. And yeah, actually, I'm even keeping the lamps very low here. Anyway, we're moving on to the very final part of this video, which is the last bridge. And this is a bit of a weird one. It's like a little bit of a finicky bridge because it's inspired by these old railroad bridges, which looking back is kind of weird since it's actually a path. It's supporting a path here. But I figured, in this area this would fit the best since I wanted to keep this as open and thin and subtle as possible. And I figured with this kind of bridge we could actually achieve that. So it really just takes some wooden planks to support the path, and then there's a few wooden supports underneath that which are all just sort of weirdly hammered into each other. It's not really the most, functional looking structure ever, but this is a theme park anyway, and this stuff is reinforced anyway, and there's probably some steel beneath all of that. So I'm fine with this. I just wanted this to look a little bit finicky, like something that's not quite something to be used very often, and that just sort of runs through the landscape like an old railroad train. And hell, I just wanted to try another type of bridge as well. Would be super boring if every bridge looked the same. So yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to do here, and you can tell I've got the Halloween update at this point because I'm working with those smaller wooden pieces, which I absolutely love. I actually quite like the Halloween update as well. Yeah, I'm talking about the Halloween update a month later, because I didn't really have the opportunity to earlier. And yeah, I was actually quite a fan of it. A lot of good scenery in there, which can be used for amazing detailing. So I'm always glad when there's, you know, a larger amount of pieces to work with, because with every little bit that the piece count continues to go up in Planet Coaster, like the amount of possibilities that you have pretty much go up much more, because there are so many more like combinations that you can make with the new items. And especially because the Halloween updates brought all of these wall decorations and new posts and like tiny decorations that you can, you know, decorate posts and walls with, I thought that was a very good sort of versatile addition to the scenery of the game. And you know, you can even use it for a wooden bridge in an alpine park, so I'm mostly glad actually with the Halloween updates because of the non-Halloween uses that you can have for the Halloween objects. In any case, that's just about it for this video. I'll be just finishing off with a small path leading up to the queue. Speaking of which, the queue is the topic for the next video. I'm not entirely sure how I'm gonna tackle it yet, but I'll be adding all the scenery around that and finishing up the queue in the next episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys hopefully soon in the next one. Bye bye.